Greetings. Welcome to the How We Do Digital Ministry podcast. I'm Christopher Harris, founder of Faith Growth. You can find us online at faithgrowth.com, where we help our church clients build their digital presence and engage with their communities online. On this podcast, I have a conversation with a church leader and ask them how they do digital ministry in their community. Today, I am talking with the Reverend Kyle Oliver. Kyle, please introduce yourself and tell us how you do digital ministry.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Kyle Oliver, and I am a principal and chief product officer at a ministry consulting organization called Learning Forte. Previously, I've worked at Church Divinity School of the Pacific and Virginia Theological Seminary. I'm also a doctoral student at Teachers College, which is the School of Education at Columbia University. So I'd say how I do ministry is very much as a conversation between sort of day-to-day ministry practice in seminaries and congregations with an education scholar's view to how research can inform and enrich that work.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I am glad to have you on the podcast today. You're one of the, kind of old school people I think about when it comes to digital ministry with some of the work you were doing at Virginia Theological Seminary and where we first ran across each other. And so I'm excited to, talk today a little bit about faith formation and what that may look like online with our churches. But I'm going to start first with one of my favorite questions just to ask about if you would like to share a time that you've encountered God online or share with us how you might have seen God at work online.
Sure. Well, I am a very anxious person and have been since childhood. And a way that I have often found some grounding in the midst of that has been spoken word audio. As a kid, that mostly meant baseball on the radio, Milwaukee Brewers as an older kid. And when I was quite young, I lived in the town where the Pittsburgh Pirates spring trained in Florida. So always had the Pirates games on when I was very young and establishing these maybe good, maybe not habits. There was no baseball, believe it or not, it was talk radio. But it's that zone of I need something to capture enough of my attention to take me off of the hamster wheel, but not so much of my attention to keep me from going to sleep or what have you. It's been really cool online in the past 5 years or so to see how there are some really spiritually thoughtful technology companies and media creators who are basically thinking about like how to solve that same problem and how to spiritually accompany with explicitly religious or more generally spiritual content people like me who respond in that way. So, today it might be the Calm app and their adult bedtime stories, basically. I have definitely experienced the accompaniment of Christ through many a dark and difficult night, especially parenting a very, very young child and learning how to manage all that during COVID and all the rest. I have experienced the grace of God in being able to hear about a walk through the south of France or what have you, and let go of whatever my mind was racing about and drift off to dreamland. Another app that I love that is in that wellness and meditation and spirituality space, doing some really thoughtful work, is an app called Ritual, built on some really interesting research by some folks at Notre Dame, and some wonderful spiritual practices and other wellness practices built into that app. So I definitely find God in the presence of some smart folks who want to help me let go of whatever I'm carrying, especially in the middle of the night, but sometimes throughout the day.
That's cool. That's I downloaded the Ritual app a long time ago, but I've never used it, and I'm just realizing that I need to go check it out.
They're doing really nice work. I haven't been in the habit as much since we've moved because I'm doing a little less walking. And I need to fix that. But the Kathleen Cahalan, who is, I think, a Benedictine sister, and they have these like sort of core practices on the app. And one of the practices is a daily Lectio Divina from the Lectio, I guess I say that wrong. From the readings, it's a Catholic Eucharistic lectionary, but I often recognize the readings from an Episcopal service, on the same day, and really, really nice, perfect size, 10-minute guided practice from a really thoughtful and generous interpreter of Scripture. So it's cool.
It's cool. I'll have to check that out because I like Lectio or Lexio. I don't even know. My Latin teacher told me that the C's were all hard in Latin, so I always say Lectio.
Me too.
But everybody else seems
I've been corrected many times.
I know. It's like everybody else seems to say Lexio, and I'm like, okay, whatever.
I'm not an ascetical theologian.
Exactly. I'm like, I'll trust y'all, but I do remember what my Latin teacher said. But no, I do like that because I like kind of starting here, where you've really seen God, or these apps like Calm and Ritual and just other people bringing that, because that's kind of more what I want to talk about. Lately, we've been talking a lot about online worship, which is really what the church has been through the pandemic, very important. But I am starting to hear some chatter online, especially as we come into this fall. What does maybe hybrid formation look like? Should we have online offerings with our in-person offerings around formation and, things like that? And so I guess what I'd pose to you is, what are you hearing out there? What are you seeing as far as ways that the church, the local church can be involved in formation online?
Yeah. So, I would say that my perspective on this, I mentioned having been involved in some research that has grounded this. You mentioned the work I had done at Virginia Seminary, and the eFormation learning community there helped to launch a project that I continue to be quite involved in through my work at Learning Forte, and that's the Digital Literacies for Ministry project. And back in 2015, 2016, I think it was, I traveled all over the country and interviewed sort of thought-leading seminary faculty who were sort of on the edge of the sort of early adopter sort of edge of some of these questions about digital ministry. Many of them colleagues in faith formation. And we basically asked, as you form leaders in the church, what do you think people need to be, to be wise to and formed in terms of, skills and knowledge and practices? And we identified these 7 what we call digital literacies for ministry. You can read more at digitalliteracytoolkit.org. And I don't want to talk through all 7 of them because 7 is a lot of things to talk through in an efficient way. So let me just use a couple of them to talk about how I have been trying to think about hybrid and online faith formation for, again, since something like 2013, 2014, when we started to get involved in this at BTS, and obviously more language comes on board as we go. So one of those literacies that we identified with the help of all these experts was that, we think everybody needs to know how to convene digital and hybrid community, right? Mm-hmm. Faith leaders have always been community conveners. And some of the skills of doing that in person translate quite directly to doing that online. To make it really concrete, I always say, a good facilitator is always on the lookout, for the person who hasn't said anything yet, right? And like, how do we make sure that everyone gets a chance to get in, right? It's not much of a stretch to think about how that skill, translates to various kinds of online convening, right? We're on Zoom. If there were a bunch of us here, we'd see a participant list, and you can sort of track with, okay, who have we heard from, who have we not heard from. So convening, I think, is a digital and hybrid skill that is obviously always going to be important to faith formation ministries and other kinds of ministries. And when I think of online convening now in this, I don't want to say post-COVID, continuing COVID, new normal, whatever we're saying. This time where we expect that this is a big part of our new reality. I want to say that the convening of faith formation really needs to be sort of rallied around passion and energy, right? I'm getting ready to interview Heidi Campbell, a communication scholar, Texas A&M, very engaged in this world, at an event happening tomorrow as we record this. And Heidi's done a lot of research about how leaders are doing right now. And you won't be shocked to hear that part of how they're doing is they're exhausted, right? And I think that extends to the people we serve, right? It's an exhausting time. And so this isn't a digital thing per se, but as we think about what kind of faith formation do we want to convene, let's make sure it's around things that people have genuine passion and energy for, right? Like the time of just slapping an event together to fill the time in a program year calendar. We got to let that go.
Yes.
So how are we taking the pulse of the people we serve and helping to identify, like, what are people genuinely excited about, passionate about, fed by right now? Like, how is the invitation to convene in whatever synchronous or asynchronous way we're going to put out there? How can that be received with excitement and energy rather than, sort of resignation? And so that's about that's about being in touch with your people, online or offline. That's about following the Spirit, and it's about flexibility and about a kind of creativity around putting the sort of curriculum of the church in conversation with the everyday lives and passions of the people we serve, right? So I would argue that whatever answer you get to the ways you're asking the question of, like, what would you be excited to come to right now? What would you be excited to participate in? I would argue that whatever answer you get, like the great inheritance of the legacy of the faith of the saints, has something to say to that. And our task is to be translators of these time-honored traditions, mediated through technology, probably mediated through our modern, spiritual digital habitus, as Elizabeth Drescher says in her book Tweet If I Love Jesus, Tweet If You Heart Jesus. But it's translation. So how do we take what St. Anthony suggested we do, or whatever, and instead of doing it in I'm showing my ignorance here, in the desert, right? Instead of doing it in the desert, let's do it on Zoom or asynchronously on Slack or something, I don't know, and like put the theological questions in conversation with the everyday, because like the everyday is where people live their lives and where they experience both joy and exhaustion.
Well, I like that, because one of the things I was saying early in the summer, as people were considering, what was the fall going to look, even before the Delta variant. But, I just was encouraging churches, don't just rush back to every program, everything you've ever done. It's a good time to prune and and that was before I even realized how fatigued things were going to be, before we had the Delta variant. And I think we have a really interesting time right now to kind of reboot. And when does the faith make the most sense? It's really where it's meeting people right where they're at. And I think you're 100% right. We have, as a church, in our story from Scripture, in our history of the saints that have come before us, we have something that will speak into where our people are at. We just need to match that up instead of worrying about, I need to start a new program, or we need to restart that program or whatnot. I love that advice. That's, and I think it'll be more easier for our church leaders to put together and for our people to participate if it really is meeting that. Good advice, Kyle.
You want another one?
Sure. Yes, please.
So, a second like unto it sort of skill that came out of our research project is this idea of navigating hybrid and digital cultures, right? So this is partly about like actually using the tools, and then it's partly about like learning the sort of cultural scripts and signals when you get there, right? So like a bunch of us have, for example, learned, okay, when you're facilitating a group conversation on Zoom, like the navigating that in an effective way, the silences, the muting. I mean, the you're on mute, you're not muted, please mute. I mean, that's a sort of parody of it at this point. But I think a lot of people, for example, are finding that like mutual invitation is a rhythm of sharing in a circle, like a Zoom call, for example, that like really works. But there are lots of these cultural signals and understandings that we sort of pick up through our experience. And I'm a bit of a process nerd, to quote Glenn Weldon from Pop Culture Happy Hour, who is also one. I love that term. And so the process nerd in me wants us to not stop establishing the like cultural scripts and habits that will like help us navigate these tools effectively, right? I spent the 3 years that I lived in San Francisco, I worshiped at a church called St. Gregory of Nyssa, which has this like improvisational feel to the liturgy in a lot of ways. But like part of what makes the improvisational parts possible is the very structured scripted parts in between. And so I think we like cannot possibly over communicate about how to participate, right? And we can't over solicit feedback in how to adjust our practices and our promotional habits and our sign up rules and our all the stuff that like makes this possible, all the tool use that is probably going to be part of how we get from here to there and participating in something, like all of that. Like I think investment in making sure that everyone feels confident and that they have access, and that they understand the tools and the culture enough that the tools and the culture can get out of the way. I think that's really important. That's not sexy. That's not something that like you're gonna like read in a theology book mostly. It's not what most of us signed up for, but I feel like some attention to the process and some attention to our cultures of engagement and each other, like all that, I think really, really important right now, especially as things continue to change.
I agree. I think it's really important. And I know some people do find it frustrating because it's like, outside of the technology, we kind of just knew it because we were socialized that way. We grew up,
yes,
assuming you're still serving in the culture you grew up in. But, here, if you're not online native or not someone that's been online since 1996, like myself. It's just, it doesn't come natural. And it reminds me of kind of when we all were first getting on Twitter and you tried to explain that to somebody else. And always, I just said, you just got to hop in and go with the flow and figure it out, because there was no easy way to figure it out until you were doing it. And to a certain extent, I think we need to learn that, but you're not going to learn that right now in a book. Maybe someday all of a sudden it'll be in a book. You're going to have to get involved and start trying to do ministry online, to start learning these normative ways, and establishing that community and establishing those norms. I don't know. Would you agree with that? Or?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And it's iterative, right? Like you hop in, you have an experience, you pay attention to what happened, you evaluate, not to keep harping on these literacies, but another that we talk about is like, to do digital ministry, like you have to cultivate a posture of experimentation, right? Like,
I love that posture of experimentation.
It's not going to be perfect the first time, and it doesn't need to be perfect the first time, especially if you've messaged that it's not going to be perfect the first time, and people should bring their flexibility and their patience and whatever. But actually what matters is the second and the third and the fourth time. And each time you make a little change, you figure something out from last time, you rewrite the script, you edit that invitation email, etc. And gradually, we build the new cultures and patterns together in a way that are serving our people as best we can.
Exactly. And that's the excitement right now, is we're building it, but then where it's a little bit harder, we're getting to co-create that together as community with God, but also it's a little scary. Well, it's just not quite as easy, because the way we had been doing Sunday morning, if you will, just to think there, it hadn't changed much. And maybe the music's changed for some people, but the rest of it hasn't changed much in several hundred years. And even the duties from usher to, altar guild to whatever it may be, it's clearly defined. Even if it's not written down, it's pretty clearly defined. And now there is no definition. So I like that, the posture of experimentation, very important. Well, so I know we don't have time to go through all 7 of these, but I think it would be awesome. So I'll say, hey, everybody, go check out. We'll link. We'll be sure to link to the study and in the show notes below. So, kind of thinking about these things, I guess kind of in your mind, we're talking about this experimentation, what maybe has there been kind of a digital failure that you might have had, and what have you learned from it?
There's a long list of failures, and I'm just trying to pick one that
I just want everybody to know that Kyle has been doing this for a very long time, has a long list of failures. And so just know that, go out there and don't be afraid to try, dear listener.
In some ways, like so there's one that's on the top of my mind. I don't know how interesting it is, but it represents a whole class of typical failures. And it just came up the other day in a conversation I was in. So in my last year at VTS, we were thinking about a lot of these same kinds of questions. How do you teach skills? How do you show that someone has learned a skill? How, all that sort of thing. And I, a Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, etc., got really interested in this idea of digital badging. Our maybe mutual colleague, do you know Lisa Brown? Have you?
Yes, I do know Lisa. Well, I remember some of the stuff y'all published on starting the badges. So.
Lisa's a Girl Scout leader, so we resonated with this. We went to this conference where we were plugged in with all these other like digital experiential learning experts in secular settings, and we were like, oh man, digital badging, this is amazing. This is a great way to like invite people's engagement, to like recognize their skills, to help them learn new things, et cetera, et cetera.
Gamification, which is a big word on the digital space.
All that stuff. I was like, we're ready for this. And we spent a lot of time trying to get the sort of structure right. Again, process nerd. we were really inspired by all these people from the secular, we were like, oh, this is evangelism. Like if we adopt the badging credential systems that all these other organizations are using, like we can have all these like faith skills and digital skills, like in conversation with each other in these big marketplaces, and meet new folks and cross fertilize, and all this stuff. And like the vision just got way out ahead of where people were. And people were pumped to engage with some of our training. People were even pumped to say like, hey, I got this badge. But I got to tell you, like, they were not going to adopt their Mozilla digital backpack and, show off their sash of badges, partly from eFormation and partly from all these other, like, we just, like, the tech was clunky, nobody cared, and like two people got excited and like started something that was a good idea, but we got out ahead of our people, and a year or so later we were invited to a conference to sort of reflect on our experience, and we got connected with a woman who ran a similar kind of program at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. And the thing that she did way right that we did way wrong was she just went hyper local. She didn't try to get these badges to matter to anybody else. There was no tech. There was no, like, the badge was just, you did this activity and you got the badge in the context of the formation program at this synagogue. And it was like all of what is cool about badges and learning, and the way that like one skill fits into a sash or a collage or a constellation of other skills. It was all of that with like none of the baggage. And so it connected with her people a lot more and meaningfully structured their education materials in this synagogue in a way that they really didn't for our eFormation audience. So I like making stuff, right? And I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I want to spend a long time getting it ready, getting it perfected. And so to go back to that experimentation thing, that's not an experiment, right? Like that's a overdetermined hypothesis from me. And I needed to back way up and start small, start with a pilot, get a few people together, get some feedback, getting a little thing in front of people and getting feedback on it is I think has got to be the engine of all of this innovation. And I've learned that lesson a few too many times.
I think that is wise. There's some good wisdom there, because I think there is the potential that the internet could connect us with, does connect us with the world, and we could, have tens of thousands of followers as a church leader or whatnot. But I think when we start thinking, how do I scale at that level, we're doing it wrong. I think you're right when we just like what's going to make the biggest impact here and let that grow over time. And what I see more than anything is consistency is probably the best thing. Starting small and getting consistent, and then organic growth on that is going to work better. But coming in with something big that's probably too big to even maintain in the beginning unless you have tons of resources. But starting small and then getting consistent, you will see small growth. And then usually, not always, but a lot of times you'll even start after a year or two, might even see some exponential growth online as, the network effects start to, as you start to get network effects. And if you don't know what that is, I'll put a link to an article about network effects. We don't need to go there right now. But, that's where you can kind of get exponential growth. So I think you're wise. Keep, sometimes they say niche down, really just focus on your niche first, and then you can see where that'll go, or your congregation, I guess, in this case.
And that's part of the difficult but real blessing of this time is that we can be thinking about some niches in our communities in some like nimble and specific ways. There's 100 people out there in the pews is not like the primary mediating experience of what it is to be a faith leader right now. And I think we're being invited to that kind of a sort of nichier ministry, and that can be really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, well, it comes back to, I mean, because we're all kind of on different journeys and different places in life, and different, anything from different illnesses to different celebrations, being able to niche down allows us to really connect the gospel immediately to where people are at this point, where they're sitting today, not necessarily, trying to normative it to those 100 people sitting in the pew. You can gather those people that are right now dealing with XYZ, illness, or XYZ. Hey, we all just had a baby. So how do we tend to the faith formation for our brand new child? We can, there's immediacy, and we can make those connections. So, okay, I just looked at the time. I can't. We're. I was about to go off on another tangent, and so we're just going to say.
I wondered. I was like, oh, yeah.
Okay, so here's the deal, dear listeners. We'll have to have Kyle back, because I think he and I could keep going for another half hour. But we have reached all of our time for today, and so I want to ask Kyle our last question and just say, is there any piece of advice or anything we didn't cover that you'd like to share with our listeners? Give you the last word.
The most important literacy on our list is to have a digital practice that is spiritually wise, right? And the tech companies aren't designing stuff for us in ways that are spiritually wise. And so, as a spiritual director once said to me, like, we got to run the tech and not the other way around. So we didn't cover it much today, but let's make sure we are setting all this work up in ways that feed us as much as we can, that deplete us as little as possible, and that allow for the rest and rejuvenation and creativity and nourishment that we all need.
I will say, well, and along that, I'll say, if you haven't listened, last week's episode with Reverend Daniel, we talked a little bit about setting those boundaries that are important, and specifically in his context with Twitter. But so go check out that, and then have a little bit of context or a little bit more discussion about that if they haven't listened to last week's episode. But I totally agree. There's a lot of good with these tools, but they're not designing them necessarily to bring out the good. And we need to know that, and we need to set our Sabbath practice and totally. Well, I want to thank you, Kyle, for being here and being a guest on How We Do Digital Ministry. I want to invite all of our listeners that, hey, if you're listening to this on our website, go download a podcast app and subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app. If you're listening in your podcast app, I hope you've already subscribed to us. And if you're watching on the YouTube channel, be sure to subscribe and follow the YouTube channel. Kyle, how can our listeners find and follow you online?
Sure. Well, for better or for worse, Twitter is my personal hidey hole more often than not. I'm at KM as in Matthew Oliver, KM Oliver. And you can check out learningforte.com and digitalliteracytoolkit.org for some of the materials I was talking about.
And we'll be sure to put links to all of those in the show notes. So if you want to go click and follow Kyle on Twitter and learn more about his ministry at Learning Forte and how Learning Forte may be able to help your congregation, they have ways that they can work with you. So thanks again for listening today. We'd love to connect with you in another way. I ask you to join our private Facebook group, cleverly titled How We Do Digital Ministry. The link is in the show notes. It is a place where you can gather with other church leaders just trying to figure this out, ask questions, learn from one another, continue discussion for the next Tuesday through Monday until the next episode of our podcast release on Tuesday. Until next week, peace and blessings to you all.